Hello. This sermon audio is a ministry of the Town Church in Fort Collins, Colorado. If you would like to learn more about us, how to connect, or how to support us, go to our website, thetownchurch.org. While listening to the Bible preached is a healthy part of our spiritual formation, it is not the whole picture. So if you aren't a part of a local church, we encourage you to prayerfully commit to a local body of believers where you live. We're glad you can join us, and we hope God uses the following sermon to reveal more of His glory to you.
Well, good morning. Good morning. You guys are more awake than the first crew. Hey, welcome. We're glad you're here this morning. My name is Vince. If we have not met, I'd love to meet you. I am one of the elders here, and I'd love to get to know you and meet you after the service. So let's do that. If you have a Bible, turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 9 this morning. Ecclesiastes 9. We've been working through the book of Ecclesiastes over the last few months, and we plan to continue until we finish the book of Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes 9. If you don't have a Bible, there should be one there in front of you in the pew. Grab one, and you can use that while you're here. And if you don't own a Bible, then you can take that one home with you as a gift. So there you go, Ecclesiastes 9. It is, it's one of those mornings, at least for me, where I feel a little bit, it just feels like kind of a sleepy morning. And so to help me and to help you, we're going to do a little bit of crowd participation this morning. Okay, so I'm going to say a sentence, and I want you to help me with the sentence by finishing the last word. All right, is everybody ready? It's either that or calisthenics, so you guys choose. Here we go. Here's the first sentence. Hospital cafeteria food is always awful, right? All right, thank you. I'm going to answer before you on that one. All right, so that's good. You did well there. Let me go with another one. When you are camping, food always tastes better, right? Better. Now, why is that the case? Why does everyone know those questions? The answers to those, the fill in the blanks there. Because we've experienced it, right? We've just experienced that. It's all about the experience. It's about the circumstances surrounding that meal, if you can call it that. I might even say that it has everything to do with the situation. Has everything to do with the circumstances. Do you agree? Disagree? Let me work through it this way. Maybe you would say, no, at a hospital, in a hospital cafeteria, the food is just nasty. Like, that's a given. It has nothing to do with the circumstances. It's a given that it's just nasty. You put anything on a tray in a cafeteria next to a Jell-O cup, and it's nasty. That's the definition of nasty. You might say that. Well, I'm going to disagree, and here's how I'm going to do that. Let me do a little test. Macaroni and cheese at a hospital cafeteria. Nasty, right? There's no way that you can eat that and think that that is good. Macaroni and cheese while you are camping. Best meal you've ever had, right? So there's that test. Our enjoyment of food has much to do with the circumstances surrounding the consumption of that food. And that's not just with food. I think we do that with so much in our lives, don't we? The circumstances surrounding life's events shape our enjoyment of that thing. It just happens that way. It happens in life that way based on what's going on at the time, right? It's rare that you are in the cafeteria of a hospital because something joyous has happened, right? Now, sometimes that's the case. I get that, right? I'm not saying that all of experiences are like that, but it's just rare, right? And I would say it's not as rare for you to be snuggled back in your camping chair, right, next to a crackling fire. You're watching the sun set behind a beautiful range of mountains. And as you're sitting there, a smiling elk walks by, right? He's smiling, hand in hand with a mountain lion, right? Both of which have bluebirds on their shoulders. And at that zippity-doo-dah moment, you sink your teeth into a half-cooked, half-burnt piece of skillet-fried meatloaf, and you think, this is the best thing I've ever tasted, Right? That's just the way that works out. Tell me I'm wrong. We'll talk about that sometime later. We enjoy the things of life based on the circumstances that are surrounding those things. Right? We've worked through the book of Ecclesiastes so far, and over the last few weeks, we're all just a little bit depressed, aren't we? I mean, we walk away from chapter after chapter of these kind of depressing, heavy, weighty things. A few weeks ago, we saw that the wicked prosper. Things seem to work out for those who do evil things. Even as they're doing evil, their lives seem to be extended. While the righteous, even while they're doing righteous things, they die. And then last week we saw how we can pursue all the wisdom that we can manage, all the wisdom that we can gather, and that still won't help us in figuring out all of the deep things of God. Bad stuff happens to good people, and good stuff happens to bad people, and that stuff just doesn't make sense. I mean, that's how we're walking through the book of Ecclesiastes, and it's hard stuff, and at times it seems heavy. And if those are the circumstances that I just walked through, in which we're surrounded, if those are the circumstances that we're surrounded by, then everything is like hospital cafeteria food, isn't it? It's just all horrible. But listen, friends, we have a God who created all things. He created all things, I'm going to add something here, to be enjoyed. To be enjoyed. God created all things, and while He created all things, at the end of all of that, what did He say? It is good. So He creates it and He says, this is good, and He creates it and He says, that's good, and He creates it and He says, this is good, and on and on. That's the world that God created. And here's our part, we introduced sin. And now we have the devastation of hospital cafeteria food. We introduced sin, and so many other things that could bring enjoyment are there, and they're surrounded by and they're affected by our sin and the sin of others. We live in a fallen world, and we are a fallen people. But here's my question. Should that rob us of our joy? Should that rob us of our joy? Should we read through Ecclesiastes and step out to live the rest of our days in this pessimistic sort of outlook, this Eeyore kind of way, where everything is bad always and we are always looking for our lost tail? Is that the way we should face life? Or can we face life with enjoyment, even in the midst of those circumstances? Here's the reality, and we've already learned this in the book of Ecclesiastes. Here's the reality. Death is certain. And the life that we live in so many ways is uncertain. It's unpredictable. That's reality. Death is certain. Life is not. And so what we see this morning in the first verses of chapter 9 is this, that in the midst of the reality of life and death, in the midst of the reality of life and death, we can still and must still enjoy the days God has given us in the midst of that. And so let me just talk through quickly how we're going to structure our time together, how we'll walk through this passage. If you remember back from the book of Mark, when we worked through Mark, we're going to do something similar to the sandwich technique. Do you remember that? Where you've got a piece of bread here, and you've got a piece of bread here, and in the middle you've got the meat or the stuff that actually tastes good. So you've got that together, right? And so that's how we're going to work through this book. In the beginning 6 verses, we're going to see that death is certain. And then at verse 11 and 12 of chapter 9, near the end, we're going to see that the things of this life are uncertain, or at least they seem to us. And then right in the middle of that, we're going to see that we can still enjoy God. We can still enjoy the life that God's given us today. So that's how we're going to work through that. Bread, meat in the middle at the end. All right? So let's just dive in. Chapter 9, verse 1. You'll see what I'm getting at. Chapter 9, verse 1. The preacher says this. He says, "But all this I laid to heart, examining it all, how the righteous and the wise and their deeds are in the hand of God. Whether it is love or hate, man does not know. Both are before him. It is the same for all. since the same event happens to the righteous and the wicked, to the good and the evil, to the clean and the unclean, to him who sacrifices and him who does not sacrifice. As the good one is, so is the sinner. And he who swears is as he who shuns an oath. This is an evil in all that is done under the sun, that the same event happens to all. Also, the hearts of the children of man are full of evil, and madness is in their hearts while they live. And after that, they go to the dead. But he who is joined with all the living has hope. For a living dog is better than a dead lion. For the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing. They have no more reward, for the memory of them is forgotten. Their love and their hate and their envy have already perished, and forever they have no more share in all that is done under the sun. So how's the preacher begin? First piece of bread, the first 6 verses. How does the preacher begin? He begins with this all-encompassing summary of what has happened and what will happen. He says in verse 1, I've studied everything. I've studied everything about life. Everything the righteous and the wise do are in the hand of God. He's sovereign over everything. Everything. I've examined it all. I don't know the outcome from God's perspective. I don't know what's going to happen. It may be gracious love from God. It may be wrath-filled hatred from God. I don't know the outcome, but I do know this. Everyone stands before him. He is sovereign over everyone. That's how he starts, with this summary, looking back and pointing forward. And then he goes on to explain what he means by all in verse 2. The righteous, the wicked, the good, the evil, the clean, the unclean, the one who is religious, making sacrifices, the one who is irreligious, not making sacrifices, the one who is good, the one who sins, the one who promises, and the one who breaks his promises, and everyone in between are under the hand of God. Everyone is under the sovereign hand of God. And what's the outcome? What's the outcome? He tells us in verse 3, death. Everyone dies. That's the outcome. Why? Why is that the outcome? Let's just be simple this morning for just a bit. And let's talk through the gospel. Why is that the outcome? We talk about this often, and some would say that we talk about this too often. But the reason that death entered the world, the reason that the outcome for everyone is death, is because sin entered. The reason that death entered is because sin entered. And that is part of our story. That's part of our story. That's part of your story and my story. God told the first man in Genesis chapter 2, you may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. And so what happens? Adam and Eve sinned. They disobeyed God's command to them. He gave them this great and gracious gift of having anything they wanted. Have you ever thought about that? Places them in the middle of the garden and says you can have anything you want. Enjoy it all, except for one tree. And they chose to go after their own desires. And so do we. We continue. Each of us, all of us, this is one of the main plots of our story, isn't it? I don't know how to talk about humans, you and I, without talking about sin. Often. Right? Often. I just don't know how to do it. We're sinners and we're bent in that direction until God changes us. And even after God changes us, we still have an inclination towards sin, don't we? And so it's a constant battle of fighting against sin and God changing us and working in us to fight against that. That's our story. To talk about that story and not mention sin is deceptive. It's deceptive. It's not telling the whole story, is it? It's just not. There was a boy by the name of Charlie who lived in a very poor family. He lived with his parents in a very small house. And with his parents lived also his grandparents on his mom's side and his grandparents on his dad's side. That's 7 people in a very tiny house that was falling down around them. And his grandparents, to make matters worse, are sick and they're bedridden. They can't get out of bed. And to make matters even worse, Charlie's dad has just lost his job. And so now they have no money. They have no way of fixing up this house. They have no way of feeding themselves. They have no way to help the aging and failing grandparents. And that's Charlie's story. Charlie and his family are in a desperate situation. That's why a chance to tour the world-renowned chocolate factory and a lifetime supply of chocolate is such a good thing, right? You all saw that coming, right? I saw right? But that's part of Charlie's story, right? Charlie and the chocolate factory would not be Charlie and the chocolate factory with that being a part of his story. And in the same way, we cannot talk about who we are as humans on this earth under the hand of a sovereign God without talking about our sin, without talking about our tendency towards sin, without talking about the penalty of that sin. If you can think of a better way to talk about our condition without talking about sin, please let me know. Send me an email. We'll get some time to talk over some chocolate, and we'll have this conversation. If you can think of a better way to talk about our condition without introducing sin into that conversation, then I'm all ears. I want to hear about it, but I just don't think we see it in the Bible. Some people will say, well, you need to talk more about love, and I think that's absolutely true. We need to talk more about God's love, and I think that's true. And so we start with places like Romans chapter 5. But God shows his love for us. We'd all like to stop there, right? But God shows his love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Do you see? How do we talk about the love of God without talking about how lovely it is? We deserve something so much different, and because of the love of God through his son Jesus, we're sinners, but we're invited into his family. We've got to talk about that. Death is certain, and it's certain because of sin. And so the preacher goes on in Ecclesiastes 9 to communicate in verse 4 that death is certain, but there are some benefits about being alive. There's some benefits to being alive. There's hope for the living. Sure, this life doesn't seem fair at times, and things may be rocky now. Good things happen to bad people, and bad things happen to good people. But there are still things in this life that are good and hopeful. There are things that are good and hopeful. And so the preacher gives us this proverb that we all know. Even a living dog is better than a dead lion, right? You all get that, right? No, we don't. So let me explain what he's getting at. Right? This isn't a Fort Collins dog that the preacher is talking about, right? This isn't a dog that you care about more than a human, right? This isn't a dog that you spend hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars so that they can live to the ripe age of 19, and then you have it stuffed when it dies and put on a mantle. That's not the kind of dog that the preacher is talking about. He's talking about the way that dogs were seen then, and that was a nuisance. They were like rats to the people. And so he's saying, even if you're a mangy dog who is alive, there is good for you. You're better than a strong, brave, noble lion if you have life. And so he continues in verse 5 and 6 to show that there's some good for those who are living. That they have knowledge of the world around them. They know many things. They even know that someday they will die. The dead know nothing. They don't get anything else out of life. They are forgotten. They don't get to enjoy the things of life under the sun, in the preacher's words. And so here's the big picture conclusion as we look at these 6 verses. Here's the conclusion, and it's this. I've already said it. Death is certain. In this world, there aren't too many things that are certain, are there? But death is certain. It happens to everyone. It happens to everyone, the righteous and the wicked. It happens to the good and the bad. It happens to those who are on this side and on this side. There are pleasing and joyful things that we can experience, and we live on this earth, but the end is the same for everyone, and that's death. And I understand that when said so bluntly, that seems really sad and depressing, right? And sad and pessimistic. When said so bluntly, it seems really harsh, right? And our good friend Cassie lost her mother this past week. That's a tragic loss in their family. That's tragic. It's devastating. And so I'm not making light of this at all. I'm not trying to be flippant about how I'm saying these things. Death is hard. It's hard, and it's a reality. But we must remember in the midst of that death exists because of sin and the effects of sin. Again, God said to Adam in the garden, if you sin, you will die. And he sinned. And so do we, and so does everyone after Adam. And God keeps his promises. And that's a good thing, by the way. That's a good thing. But when we think about this truth, I want us to hear this, okay? When we think about this truth, the fact that everyone faces certain death, here's where our minds have got to go. Here's where our minds have got to go. We've got to train our hearts and our minds to know another truth. And what's that other truth? It's this, that God requires death for sin. And the one who never sinned stepped into our place and took our death for us. We've got to remember that when we're thinking about death. And like I said, we've got to train our hearts to believe that. We need God's help to believe that. God requires death for sin, and the one who never sinned stepped into our place and took our death for us. When we think about death, that should come to mind. Yes, death is certain, but it's not the end. Isn't that a beautiful thing? Death is certain, but it's not the end. In fact, Paul said in 1 Corinthians 15, he said this is of most importance. In other words, if you don't get anything else through your thick head, this is of most importance, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures. Yes, Christ died, but he didn't stay dead. He was raised from the dead. That thing is certain, right, for every human. The thing that is certain for every human was defeated by Christ. And now we know that death is certain, but it's not final. What a beautiful, beautiful thing. In the midst of seeing death, in the midst of knowing that death is coming. Death is certain, but because of Christ, it's not final. The loss that comes with death is brutal, and the truth that death is certain seems hopeless, but to know that it is not final is hopeful, isn't it? It's hopeful. Paul tells us later that the sting of death is sin, but in Christ, death is swallowed up in victory. And then I love these questions that he asks. They almost seem taunting, right? He's quoting someone else, but it almost seems taunting. Oh, death, where's your victory now? Oh, death, where is your sting? In light of Christ, where is your victory and where is your sting? Death is certain, but it's not the end. And the preacher continues. Let's move on to life, if that wasn't depressing enough. Let's move on to what he talks about next in verses 11 and 12. Jump down to verse 11. And look there, verse 11. He says this. He says, again, I saw that under the sun, the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to the intelligent, nor favor to those with knowledge. But time and chance happen to them all. For man does not know his time. Like fish that are taken in an evil net, and like birds that are caught in a snare, so the children of man are snared in an evil time, when it suddenly falls upon them. So here's what we see. In the previous verses, we see that death is certain. I think in these verses, we see that life is uncertain. Death is certain, but the things of life seem uncertain. They seem unpredictable. The preacher says, physically speaking, life is unpredictable. Life is unpredictable. A race is not always won by the fastest person. Right? You know that. You've heard the tortoise and the hare, right? You know that. That's a truth. Right? Fables are all true. And so that's the case. And then he goes on. He says the battle's not always won by the one who's the strongest. Right? Think of David and Goliath. That's not a fable. That's in the Bible, and it's true. Physically speaking, things seem unpredictable. They seem like we can't have answers for them. They seem uncertain. Intellectually speaking, life is unpredictable. The wise, the intelligent, the knowledgeable don't always come out ahead. They don't get the bread. They don't get the riches. They don't get the favor. And what does the preacher tell us in verse 11? He says, time and chance happen to them all. Right? Yes, it's true that God is sovereign over all things, but from our finite, fallible perspective, it seems as if random chance has taken over, doesn't it? And we often talk like that. Oh, well, what a coincidence, right? Oh, it's interesting that you're here. And we talk about them as if things are random chances. That's the way it seems. Sure, we know that with God, everything in life is planned, everything is orchestrated, everything is ordained. There's no such thing as chance. Everything happens or is caused by something, maybe we would say someone, but we still think, no, maybe that's just chance. And what are we doing when we move in that direction? I think we're doubting God, aren't we? One author I read this week said to say that something happens by chance is simply to confess our ignorance of the cause. To simply say that something happens by chance is simply to confess our ignorance of the cause. And who's that cause? God. Life is uncertain, or at least from our perspective, but we know that the things of life do not happen by chance, do they? They are all placed in our lives for a reason. Circumstantial from our perspective. From God's perspective, they're there for a reason. There's certainty to the one who causes the events of life to happen. And so the preacher continues to show how things seem uncertain and left to chance. And he says a fish is caught in a net and a bird is caught in a trap. And just like the uncertainty of nets and traps to the unsuspecting fish and bird, humans are caught in this uncertain life by the certainty of death. We're caught in just the same way, caught off guard by the certainty of death. But God is over all things, right? To say that something happens by chance is to confess our ignorance of the cause, God. Life seems uncertain, we should say. Life seems unpredictable, we should say. But there is a God who's over it. And all of those things are placed in our lives for a very specific reason. And so let's go into the meat of the sandwich and see. If we believe that God is sovereign over all things, and in that belief we come to understand that death is certain and the things of this life seem uncertain, how do we then respond today? I think that's our question. Death is certain, and life seems so uncertain. So how do we respond today? And in the midst of all of that, how do we respond today? How do we respond? Why does food around a campfire taste so much better? I'll argue that it's not just circumstances. Should that be the case in life, that our circumstances dictate how we are going to enjoy things? They're there for a reason, and they're good. But should that dictate how we enjoy this life? It's not wrong to enjoy the food by a campfire. Those are good circumstances, but I would also argue that it may be wrong to not enjoy food in the hospital cafeteria simply because of the circumstances. Does that make sense? I read this last week of Corrie ten Boom. You probably know her story. She was held in a concentration camp in Nazi Germany for helping Jews escape the Holocaust. And while she was in this concentration camp, she and her sister had fleas. Right? No one wants that, right? Show of hands. No one if you don't raise your hand, someone may get up and move away from you. Just saying. All right, but no one wants that. That's not a circumstance that anyone would want. But here's what she said in the midst of that. She said that she and her sister learned to rejoice and to give thanks for the fleas because the guards would not go to the places that were flea infested. And so she learned to rejoice in the fact that she had a circumstance that no one would want because it meant safety for her. And so she's finding things to rejoice about. That's the kind of perspective we gain from the preacher in Ecclesiastes. In the beginning 6 verses, we see that death is certain, that everyone dies, that death surrounds us. In verses 11 and 12, we see that life is uncertain, or it seems that way. We never know what's going to happen. It all seems like chance, and at times we can slip into thinking that it is chance, that no one is over this chaos. We slip into thinking that. So on the one hand, there's the certainty of death, and on the other hand, there's this uncertainty of life. And then right in the middle, God ordained enjoyment of life. We get that from the preacher. Look at verse 7 of chapter 9. He says, "Go eat your bread with joy, and drink your wine with a merry heart. For God has already approved what you do. Let your garments be always white. Let not oil be lacking on your head. Enjoy life with the wife whom you love all the days of your vain life that he has given you under the sun, because that is your portion in life, and in your toil at which you toil under the sun. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might. For there is no work or thought or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol, to which you are going. Now, this is not the first time that we've seen the preacher instructing us to enjoy life, is it? It's not the first time. We've seen him say this several times over and over. In chapter 2, he says this, and twice in chapter 3, once in chapter 5, once in chapter 8, and then I think in a few weeks in chapter 11, we'll see it again. In some ways, yes, the book is depressing, but in other ways, we see the preacher instructing us over and over and over again to enjoy life. But as often as he has done that throughout the book, he's not done it as much as in these 4 verses. In these 4 verses, we see a string of imperatives. We see a string of commands. Enjoy your bread. Enjoy your wine. Enjoy your wife. Enjoy the work that you have to do. He begins in verse 7. He says, go eat your bread with joy. How can he say that right on the heels of informing us that death is certain? Death is certain. It's coming for everyone. It's coming. Death is certain for everyone who lives. Death is certain. Now go enjoy bread. How can he say that? Here's how we can say it. Death is certain, so go enjoy some bread. Fresh out of the oven, still steaming, butter melting down through the little pores in the bread. And then I like mine with a little honey on it. Someone give me some bread. Death is certain. Enjoy bread. Enjoy the very simple, basic things of life that God has given to us for our enjoyment. Enjoying the bread that God has given us. Do you understand that God has, by His very kind and gracious hand, given us taste buds that sense the flavors, that send signals to your brain that then trigger enjoyment in all kinds of ways? That's very scientific, so write that down. That's as scientific as I get. You have taste buds. God gave those to you. God gave those to you as a kind gift, even in the midst of life's certainties and uncertainties. He's given you good gifts. Have you ever been around people who make the most of their food enjoyment? I think throughout the lives of all 5 of our boys, there's been moments for each of them that as they're eating, they don't even realize it, but they're humming. Right? You've been around kids who they don't realize it, they're just enjoying that. Who's eaten with Rusty Lay before? Right? You sense that from Rusty. He just... These little pleasing smacks that let us know that he's enjoying his food. In the midst of the certainty of death and in the midst of the uncertainty of life, enjoy food. Enjoy the fact that God has given you the ability to enjoy food. And so the preacher continues, drink your wine with a merry heart. In this day, wine was used for celebration. Celebrate. Drink your wine with a merry heart. The preacher tells us in the midst of life's certainties and uncertainties, enjoy good drink. Enjoy it. And the preacher continues, eat good food, drink good drink, enjoy it. And I want us to see the end of verse 7. He says this, for God has already approved what you do. Isn't that freeing? For God's already approved it. God's already looked at your enjoyment with approval and said, do it. Do it. God's already improved your enjoyment. For those of you who have children, you'll understand this illustration. There are kids who often ask for things, even though it's in their reach. We have a son, one of our youngest sons, will come and ask me often, Dad, can I have a drink of water from the cup that's on the table within my reach that is my cup? Can I don't know if he's just trying to make conversation there or what he's doing, but he often asks that kind of question. And what's my response to them? to him, of course you can have a drink from that cup of water that is already yours. Why would I answer in any other way? And the same is true here. God is a God who loves us. He's a father who delights in giving his children good gifts. The good food that we eat and the good drink that we have, it has been given to us already. God has already approved it. And so enjoy it. But hear this well. Enjoy it because you know it came from him. Enjoy the food that you have and the drink that you have because it came from him. How many of us pray before our meals because that's what we've been trained to do? How much more should we pray after our meals that God gave us something good to eat? The preacher continues in verse 8 with more celebratory words. White clothes, we don't have time to get into this. White clothes were clothes of celebration. Oil on the head was used for celebration. And so he says, do it, enjoy it. In verse 9, the preacher commands, enjoy life with the wife whom you love. Enjoy life with your spouse. Sleep in on Saturday morning. That command is only for those who don't have children. Sit at a table and enjoy coffee. Sit by a fire and enjoy a good conversation. Go for a hike together. Go grocery shopping together, nerds. Go work in the yard together. Enjoy the relations that married couples enjoy. Enjoy life with your spouse. In the midst of life's certainties and uncertainties, enjoy life with your spouse. Some of you need to hear that. Because what you've done is you've turned something that's meant for enjoyment, and you've taken that relationship for granted, and now it's become functional and not enjoyable. No, enjoy life with your spouse. And then in verse 10, the preacher commands, whatever you have to do, do it. Enjoy it. The things that are placed in your life, do those things and do them well and enjoy them. Now, why does the preacher, I want to ask these questions, why does the preacher continue to instruct us over and over and over again that we're to enjoy life today? Why does he do that over and over again? He says, enjoy life today. Have you thought about that? Why has he done that? I think it's because we're so consumed with the circumstances surrounding our day that we neglect to enjoy the day. Is anybody else there? Our worry about the circumstances of our lives robs us of the enjoyment of today. Does anybody else need to hear that again? I do, so I'm going to say it again. Our worry about the circumstances of our lives robs us of the enjoyment of today. Jesus talks about this very thing, life's circumstances, in Matthew chapter 6. In fact, he tells us that not to worry about these daily circumstances. He says, don't be anxious about those daily circumstances. He says in verse 25, don't be anxious about what you'll eat, about what you'll drink, about what you'll wear. He's nailing all of these sort of simple circumstances of today. And he says, don't worry about those things. Eat, drink, wear. Don't be anxious about what you cannot control. Don't be anxious about those things that our sovereign God does control. And here's what Jesus' remedy is in all of that. He tells us a few things at the end of Matthew chapter 6. First, he says, look at the birds of the air and the flowers of the field. Now, this is a new thought that just came to my mind this week as I'm looking at this passage and thinking about this. This is what I think Jesus is telling us. He's saying this. He says, slow down. Don't worry about the things of the future. Slow down. Take time to do some bird watching. Slow down and take time to walk through a field that's full of flowers and look at this field of flowers. Enjoy the life around you today, and I think you'll notice that you have nothing to worry about. Slow down and take some time to just look at the birds. Look at the flowers that are around you. I was on a run this last week, and I was thinking about a lot of things that had sort of bombarded my mind and my heart, and I had to stop to retie one of my shoes, and so I sat down under this tree. And I think as I was looking and seeing this tree, the thought came to mind, God created that tree. He spoke that tree to existence. Why am I concerned about the things that are surrounding my day? And so I think we have to do that intentionally. Intentionally look for things. And I think that's what Jesus is saying. Look at the birds. Look at the flowers. Intentionally look for things that are placed in your life so that you will enjoy God more. Maybe for you, you need to make a list and look at it often. Death is certain. And even though God is sovereign over all things, from our perspective, the things of life seem uncertain. And even still, we can enjoy today. We can. We can enjoy today, and we should. And this goes all the way back to the garden. Everything that God created is good. He has given all of these things to us as gifts. A gift by nature requires no payment. He has given the things of life, and the things of this life, even the circumstances of this life. He has given those things to us as gifts to be enjoyed. But here's what happens. Because of sin, everything is now mixed up and messed up. And the things we should enjoy, we abuse. And death is certain. That's where we end up. We mix these things up, and what we see from the preacher and what we understand about this life on this earth is that death is certain and life seems uncertain. But here's where we end in all of this. I want to bring this in for us, something that the preacher really didn't have a handle on at the time. On this side of the cross, we know that our enjoyment isn't over when we die. It's only the beginning. It's only the beginning. At times, things may seem dark. Things may seem depressing in this life. We may feel as if we're digging ourselves into a pit with life's circumstances. Things are crowding in, and we're just going further and further and further into a pit. Something I read again from Corrie ten Boom this last week. She's talking about the circumstances around her, and here's what she said. She says, there's no pit so deep that he, God, there's no pit so deep that he is not deeper still. There is no pit so deep that he is not deeper still. In other words, here's what she's saying. We may think that life is dark and depressing, and at times it is. It is. It just is. But in those dark and depressing pits of life, God is there. And you know how he's there? Emmanuel. God is with us. Jesus. He left his rightful place. Brett already talked about this. We sang about this. He left his rightful place to come down to our pit. To come down to our pit. A pit so deep that we feel overwhelmed. But he's not. He lived a perfect life in the midst of this pit in an imperfect, fallen world. He suffered. Death is certain, and he died. He died, but he didn't stay dead. Death has no victory over him because Jesus came to a pit so deep and conquered it. This life is not all we have. Jesus conquered sin and death so that we could truly enjoy God forever, and that starts now. I think so often we have this big picture view of heaven then when that happens, when we're in heaven, then we start enjoying things. No, that starts now. We're enjoying the life that God has given us now, hoping for a better life with him forever when Jesus comes. Life's circumstances are a part of our story. The things that we're in right now are a part of our story. Death is certain and life seems uncertain, but in the middle, remember that God sent his Son to take our sin, to defeat it, to defeat death so that we could enjoy life today. To enjoy life today so that we could enjoy the sovereign God today and into eternity. Can I pray for us that would be true? That we would believe that and that would sink in deep this week, even today. Let me pray for us. Father, there are so many things in life that seem so uncertain. And that's our perspective. But we've got to understand. We hope to understand. We need to understand. We want to understand that you have all things in your hand. There's nothing outside of your grasp. There's nothing outside of your control. There's nothing outside of your sovereign or ordering. That's you. And so as we think about life on this earth, would we see the things that seem uncertain as things that you've given to us so that we would trust you more? And God, I don't say that very, very lightly. There's so many things in life that seem uncertain that I don't want to trust you with. There are things in life that seem uncertain and I don't understand. And I want to understand and I want to control it. And so I reach to try to grab that out of your hand. But no, God, you're over all things. And so I pray that we would believe that. That in this life, a life where death is certain because of our own sin, and in this life where things seem uncertain, that we would see very clearly that you're over all things and you're even over the very thing that has drawn us to you, and that is your Son coming to earth, to this pit, to walk a perfect, sinless life, so that we could be in relationship with you and enjoy the good gifts that you, our Father, delights in giving. Not just here, but throughout eternity as we worship you. Would you help us to believe that? I pray. Amen.